Broadcasting from Baltimore, Maryland, this is 5x3 Radio, where strength is for everyone. I'm your host, Emily Sokolinski, owner of 5x3 Training, a strength and conditioning gym in Baltimore, along with my co-host, Rebecca Fishburne, founder of Cornerstone Strength Maryland. Each week, Rebecca and I will discuss the ins and outs of strength training, why there is a no one-size-fits-all approach, and why strength is so important in our daily lives. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Now, on with the show.
First.
I made you go first. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. 5x3 Radio.
Start that over.
I'm not starting any over it. I'm not starting anything over again. I love it. We are back and here today to talk about asymmetry and what does that mean with your, in regards to your lifting. People often talk about, having one side stronger than the other and, it's because I'm right arm dominant or I'm left arm dominant. But is that really what's going on there? And should we address asymmetry? How do we address asymmetry? When does it become necessary to address those factors? You like how I just jumped right into it today? There's no banter at all, and
that's because, and I appreciate that because Emily was threatening me with having to talk first. I don't like to be first.
So asymmetry. We want this isn't going to be a real long podcast. I think it's something that we tend to sometimes, I don't think as coaches, but maybe as trainers. I don't know if that's I don't want to call out trainers. We obsess about the fact that maybe one side is different from the other side, and we need to do a lot of extra work on that one side to help the other side. But is that necessarily needed in the beginning of a strength program, right?
Yeah.
Is that needed? So the way that you and I train people, how we start their progression, we're working with compound movements, we're working with bilateral movements, squatting, pressing, deadlifting, benching. Do we necessarily need to worry about that? And how do we address that when working with our clients who say, oh man, did you notice that this tilts to the other side? Or why do I keep hitting the spotter arm when I'm benching on the right side? And what? So let's jump into how, what is it? What do we mean when we're saying, asymmetry? What's going on there? We're definitely not all symmetrical. I constantly tell that to people. And what are some things that you and I both will do to address it, get people to pay attention to it? Let's just kind of jump into what are we talking about when we talk about asymmetry?
Well, I mean, just to get back to one thing that you said initially about coaches or trainers, right? I think a lot of times people use those terms interchangeably, and I think those probably are two distinct and separate things to you and to me.
Right.
And so when you and I say coach, we're thinking like a strength coach, and we're generally talking about somebody who's working with an individual to use barbells in order to build strength in a manner similar to what's described in the starting strength novice linear progression, or intermediate programming.
There's a process, there's progress, there's progression, there's a program. We're working. There's a specific goal that people have, and it's usually to build strength. Yes. Right.
And trainer, I think we usually think more in terms of like a personal trainer. You go to a gym, you're going to buy a couple sessions. It might be somebody whose purpose and value for the individual is that they are motivational, or it's somebody that keeps them on track, that kind of thing. And so if it's a person who is working in the field of personal training at a general gym, there's a certain, I think, tendency to feel like you have to bring special value.
You got to prove yourself.
Clients,
yes.
Right.
Yes.
So you want to be able to provide value that the other trainers aren't able to provide. And so one of the things that really sells is this idea of like corrective exercise.
Right.
And so that totally plays on this notion that people have that they're supposed to be symmetrical. The trainer then points out to them, actually, no, you're not symmetrical. That asymmetry could be caused by a variety of different things. It might be like a weakness on one side versus the other. It might be something that's structural, like one femur turns out more in one hip socket than the other. It might be something that's based on an injury from the past. It might be based on the way people use their body in their everyday, like if you find that you're always
exactly
baby on the left hip, chances are you've got like a little bit of asymmetry there, in the hips and the way you use your body, just getting through life. And so a trainer can then give you exercises that are corrective, that help you to become more symmetrical or more imbalanced, or in balance. And so if you're coming to barbell training, kind of like I was initially from that sort of background, I was sort of fresh off of getting my personal training certification. And it was sort of like, okay, why isn't anybody talking about being symmetrical?
Right.
Right. And so it's a different goal, right? So in the one case, the corrective exercises are a selling point. Maybe there's, some reasons for that, which, are appealing to the general public, and there's some value there. But in terms of strength training with the barbell, that's not the purpose. That's not the stated goal. The stated goal with the novice linear progression is to build general strength. You're trying to build general strength as using as much muscle mass as possible over the greatest range of motion, all of that sort of thing. So it's like the goal is different. The selling point is a little bit different. And so, initially when I started with the barbell stuff, I think also because it is like you're saying, like a unilateral movement, you're working in a squat rack. So basically you're framed by, parallel, symmetrical squat rack uprights on either side. So
both arms, both legs, everything.
Spotlight on it if the bar is not moving at the same speed or sitting on your back equally high or low on one side or the other. So I think for people starting out, sometimes that's like a little disconcerting.
Sure.
It can be potentially.
Sure. And you don't want, I think that I'm definitely asymmetrical. I definitely have asymmetries. I'm sure you do too. I've actually become much more aware of them over the past how many years I've been doing this than I was when I was dancing. In fact, I could probably go back to my dancing and my tendonitis I developed when I was 11, 12, to my foot, my right foot. That is completely different from my left foot. And all the issues I've had on my right side stem from just that foot, and just the fact that I stand differently on that side. I was at supinate. I wear orthotics because of my high arches and what they've done to me. So your body is your body, and you can fight with your body all you want, or you can accept the body that you have, and physically, the fact that you might have one leg longer than the other, or your feet are different sizes, and you might have high arches or flat feet, but it doesn't mean that you need to do a whole bunch of exercises to make yourself better in order to do barbell training, in order to get stronger. Rebecca and I were discussing this before we started the podcast about kind of observation, and what we do as coaches is observe the whole body, right? Not just bits and pieces, not just the right arm, left arm, right leg. We're not bodybuilders. Bodybuilders want to be symmetrical, right? They're looking for
more concerned with appearance,
aesthetics. Exactly. We're working on fundamental strength here, and within that, the body, we see the whole body from head to toe. So when we're looking at someone squatting, and we see that their tendency is to want to step back, and when they take their stance, their right foot turns out more than the left. Okay, now I can and if I try to adjust that, something causes them discomfort there, or they tend to shift then to one side. So if I turn the foot back out, now the shift is gone. Now that Diego squats like that. He's definitely a little bit off center when he
totally
squats,
do. And
right?
it's like when I squat, and then because I do this myself, I notice it more with other people, and I never say anything to my
Right.
clients because I figure when I tell them how wide I want their heels to be, and I ask them to turn their toes out, and I demonstrate, whatever it is, 25,
Yeah.
35 degrees, something like that. And a lot of times people will have one leg that turns out more than the other, and it often has something to do with maybe a leg length discrepancy or the way the femur sits in the acetabulum. And so people sort of just naturally get into the toes turned out in a way that feels comfortable to them.
Right.
In the same way, like the way that this sort of was highlighted to me in my previous experience was with spin classes, where I've got one femur sitting differently in my hip socket, and when I got the spin shoes where you clip in, they set the cleat up on the bottom of the shoe, they set it up, and then they check and make sure they're symmetrical, make sure that they're both set up evenly on both sides. So I would clip into the bike with my feet both pointing exactly forward, and within a week I'd get like hip pain.
Yeah.
But if I uncleated my wonky foot, the one that turns out, and just let it sit on top of the pedal and turn outward in the way it was most comfortable, after a couple weeks, the hip pain would resolve.
Yeah.
And so that's why when I look down at my feet when I'm squatting and the one foot sticks out, I'm like, I know why that happens.
Yeah. And there's no corrective exercise that you're going to do to make your foot equal the other foot. I know that when I squat, it's the right side. It's always the right side where I find myself adjusting that toe. I find myself adjusting that foot over and over again, because that is the side, again, I have had numerous issues with, stemming from the fact, I think, just years of dancing and putting myself in a certain position for how many years. I have to be mindful of that. I'm going to kind of be constantly making adjustments and changing, how I'm standing based on how that kind of hip is feeling and doing. And that's the thing with your clients. Like, if you put them in a position and they're saying, but it feels better when I stand like this, let them stand like that.
Yeah.
If they're squatting and they're getting stronger, and the bar is moving well, the weight's moving well, that is who they are. That is their body.
And so here we're talking about issues where a person might be asymmetrical based on something that is structural.
Right.
So hips might be different.
Right.
Something with the legs. You also often have situations where people's shoulders are asymmetrical. So let's talk about that structural asymmetry in the shoulders and how we see that play out with ourselves or with lifters. And again, these are things where it's like you can fiddle with it and you're probably going to cause your client some discomfort, or you can let them find the position with their feet or whatever that just seems to
with shoulders it's usually because of a previous injury or a broken collarbone or a torn rotator cuff or something from the past. Maybe they had surgery, maybe they didn't. Most people, it wasn't surgery. It's just that, I fell when I was 5 or when I was 10, this happened.
And I've also had clients with one shoulder's jacked up more than the other, and it just goes to, it sort of traced back, or the only thing that they could identify was just the way they used their body. Carrying, I had a guy that's a lawyer, and he would always carry his briefcase on the one shoulder with that shoulder jacked up towards his ear to kind of keep the briefs and whatever all else secure, and not slide down the shoulder or whatever. So that also over time. Yep.
And you can usually see that. I mean, I can often tell especially when they're benching, not so much when they're pressing, but when they're benching, they're lying down and the bar is tilting from one side to the other, and they're really working on trying to get tight. If it's a new client, I'll say, is there an issue with that right shoulder? Oh yeah, I injured it. I can tell right away because the right side is just not moving the way, neuromuscularly, it's not moving the way that the left side is. So what I'll do is simply tell them, pay attention to it. Like literally pay attention to that side more. We're not going to stop benching and okay, let's do this. I mean, occasionally there is time and a place to stop the exercise and maybe go and teach somebody how to do something, that would help maybe open up the shoulder more. But it's more of, let's pay attention to what that side is doing, and see if we can't get you just to focus externally on what is internally going on, right, in that
So,
shoulder to keep things, as even as possible.
like, yeah, you're talking about the bar being
That's it.
tilting
Yeah,
one side
exactly.
versus the other.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other thing that I see when people have jacked up shoulders and they're benching is that if you're standing sort of in the spotter view and looking down at your lifter, the bar may not travel or may not touch down at the touch
Mm-hmm.
point parallel across. It might
Mm-hmm.
be up towards the shoulder on one side and down
Yeah,
towards the hip a
sure.
little bit more on the other side. And I think a lot of times people feel like that the bar is hitting exactly parallel across
Mm-hmm.
their chest. And
Mm-hmm.
for myself and one of my other clients recently, it's sort of the first time you see a picture or video of yourself benching from a spotter view. If you've got some sort of jacked up shoulder or something
Yeah.
asymmetrical, it can be a little bit startling. Like,
Yeah.
what the heck is going on here with my
Yeah.
shoulder?
Yeah.
Why is it so not tilty, but just kind of crooked?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get that person under the bar for squat, you might see it there too, where it's like
Exactly.
a little higher on
Mm-hmm.
one side,
Mm-hmm.
a little lower on the other side. And then, that against the starkly parallel contrast of the uprights of the squat rack can also be a little bit
Yep.
confusing at
Yep,
first.
yep,
But
and that's usually this person's tighter, and I'll
yeah,
say in layman's terms, I'll say, yeah, you're probably tighter on one side than the other. Oh yeah, well, this is the shoulder I did something to back when I was
yeah,
in
and can't get the
2012.
hand in as
Yeah,
close and all of that.
so it's again a okay. Let's adjust the grip. Let's get the bar in the better spot. It feels off center, but it's center. That's a big one where I move the bar so it's centered on their back, where the center knurling is on the right, in the middle of the back, and they'll say to me, "Oh my God, it feels like it's completely off center," because physically it does. Physically, they can feel one side pulling more than the other. Over time, the more they do it, the more the body relaxes. It won't feel as awkward anymore. But then there's that external focus again and I'll give a cue of, if it's tilting to the left, pull a bit more with the right.
Yeah.
Pull down with the right, lift up with the left. And it's just it's so minor, but you see when they do that, there's an attention to, okay, this is how my body needs to hold the bar. I know with my left shoulder, I injured it back in 2011 in a dance concert, right? I landed on the palms of my hands. My left shoulder kind of, went in. I felt it go in the middle of the piece. And since then, it's never been quite the same. It moves better at times than others, but I definitely have to pay more attention to when I'm benching, and I have my spotter arm set up perfectly, because every time I lose that tension on that left side, the bar taps.
Yeah.
Tap spot arm, and I could be as tight as possible, but for some reason,
you get a little auditory tactile,
and I love that, and I tell people that all the time. Like I'll force them to put the spotter arms in the right place, because that little tactile cue, they hit the spotter arm, they know they've lost some tension, and they're back. So it allows them to pay even more attention to what's going on, the focus there. So there's nothing that we need to stop, move to the side. It's more of attention. It's paying attention to how your body moves and how your body moves as it does, as is. And does it take a little bit more effort on my part? Sure. But over time, it becomes second nature. Like, it's just there. I know right away. And very few times now that I touch that spotter arm. Every now and then I'll lose focus. And when I lose focus, I hit the spotter arm. So there's a lot of external, focus on what's happening within that movement to keep me centered.
So we're kind of so far talking about like asymmetries that might be caused by previous injury, by just the way a person is built, like the way their skeleton is put together, by just the way they develop asymmetries in the way they use their body in everyday life, and just a little bit of increased attention to getting tighter or getting better set up. Oftentimes will address that. And I think, we haven't really talked so much about like going along with the way a person uses their body in everyday life, that will also sometimes lead to asymmetries. But those asymmetries sometimes are also caused by one side of the body, the dominant side being stronger than the non-dominant side.
Absolutely.
And with situations like that, the little bit of additional attention paid to the weaker side, trying to pull its, do its share of work, right? Particularly in bench or overhead press, where you're going to see somebody with like, a right-handed person with the left arm kind of lagging behind a little bit. And sometimes, just being like left arm, kind of allows them to make that connection and get that weaker side more involved. I guess, one of the things that we talked about with initially was barbell training. If you're just trying to build general strength and you have one side that's a little bit weaker than the other side, what are some of the benefits to training with a barbell in that sort of situation as opposed to with free weights, especially if you're just in the beginning and building general strength on your linear progression? Why would you explain, or would you explain to someone that a barbell is actually a better implement for them at that point in their training?
Are you talking about like the pressing movements?
I think primarily with the pressing movements we can talk about squat in a second. That's sort of.
But with the pressing, when you're pressing, when you're benching or you're pressing with a bar, that weaker arm, right or left, will be forced to kind of come along with that stronger arm. So you're developing a foundation of strength here. You're trying to you get both limbs, I would say, moving accordingly. And with the bar, you are trying to develop as much strength as possible, right? I mean, you can lift more weight with a barbell. So there are benefits to using the bar because we're trying to get stronger, right? Yeah. And we don't care about, weaker arm, stronger arm at this point. But there comes a point sometimes where maybe we're coming back from a surgery or an injury, and then we need to address that one side. I have a client who we started her pretty much, she came to us about a year ago after having frozen shoulder surgery. So she was manipulated, right? It was pulled out. And she had very little range of motion. So she could not press overhead. So we started her with like the ring press, right? To kind of build that range of motion again. And then slowly, after she was able to do that, we did some Viking pressing. So she didn't have to, because she couldn't quite get the bar over her head completely. Right. So the Viking pressing helped a lot, more like a landmine press. And then eventually she was able to work with the bar and start to press with the barbell. After that, months after that, then we started working with single arm movements. We didn't do that right away. Yeah. We didn't do that right away. We added that into her program months and months down the road, because there was no need to try to just work on that one side. We were trying to establish the whole body. Yeah. We wanted to get the whole body involved.
In that scenario, or even just in a scenario where someone has just in general a little bit weaker side, left side than right side, say, you're talking about initially like a person is able to move more weight with a barbell than they are able to do with another implement. But there's also, I heard Sully make a really, I thought, compelling argument for barbells as being safer, because if you're pressing, say, overhead with your, weaker arm and it cops out, the barbell, the dumbbell could swing outward.
Certainly.
And put additional stress on the tendons in the shoulder joint. So the bar helps to kind of control the range of motion. In the case of the person that you're talking about coming back from frozen shoulder surgery, the stronger arm will help push the weaker arm, or the surgeried arm, the repaired arm, into a greater range of motion that it might be able to do on its own. So like, it initially getting started, it's
we didn't do I never even thought about starting her off with single arm movements for that arm. That arm couldn't do it. That arm couldn't do anything. She was doing a ton of stretching and a ton of PT work too. So what I wanted her to do was get full range of motion. That meant both arms, because
Yeah.
we want her to be able to press. We want her to be able to get both of her arms overhead, not just that one arm. But the other arm needed to work too. They both need to get stronger. She needed to get stronger, from head to toe.
So with
Yeah.
that client in particular, you said months into it, you started out, working bilateral, both arms together to develop range of motion, then to develop general strength. And at some point much later, you decided to add some unilateral, like single arm movement.
Right.
What was
because the weight was getting heavier. The weight was getting heavier, right? So the weight was getting heavier. So that arm, that the surgery arm, she can't. I don't know if she'll ever be able to extend the elbow completely, but it got to a point where she could only do so much, right? With that, so we needed to allow that arm to get a little bit more. Okay, now it understands how to extend. Now it understands what the movement is. Let's start to focus a little bit more on developing, getting more range of motion, basically into her shoulder. So we were doing wader walks for some stability, right? And then single arm dumbbell presses. Now that's for both sides. We're not just going to focus on the right. We're going to focus on both sides. But it didn't make any sense for her to press a 3-pound dumbbell in the beginning just on her own, when that wasn't really what the goal was. The goal was we needed to get that range of motion back. And how we're going to do that? Well, the overhead pressing with a bar, starting first with the bar in the rings, was going to help kind of neuromuscularly just kind of get that movement, get her moving again better. So it wasn't going to be beneficial for her to try to do wader walks when she couldn't put her arm in any in any place. I mean, there was it's remarkable in where her arm is, was 5-6 months after she started with us. If we had tried to do that in the beginning with her, her brain couldn't take it. Her nervous system wasn't prepared to have that arm overhead like that, right? It hadn't built any strength from that. So what's the point of trying to put that poor arm
Right.
in a position that it's not familiar with? It hasn't done anything to kind of work that range yet. So that wasn't even that was not even on my mind to do that. It was more let's get her arms let's get that movement in her body, let's get that range of motion in her body. The ring press is going to help with that. The Viking press is going to help with that, getting both arms involved. And then, okay, now we've gotten to a point where weight's getting heavier. Let's see if we can address, just a little bit more movement with a lighter weight, where she can kind of push that arm a little bit more on its own. Because now it has the strength physically, and she has the mental capacity to do it. It doesn't worry her. It doesn't bother her.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing when you're talking about mental capacity, or her brain won't let her. It's like a protective mechanism.
Of course it is.
The central nervous system is trying to protect what was, a frozen or injured
Yeah, she couldn't, her range of motion, she couldn't, I mean, we're talking about getting your arm to your ear. Her arm wouldn't even go past 90 degrees. Yeah. Right? I mean, if we're talking about a frozen shoulder. So that why, the thought of trying to do some single arm work with her.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
But also, I mean, for a lot of people, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that initially, because initially the goal is build general strength, and you're going to be able to move more weight if you're using a barbell and using both arms together.
Exactly.
And then after you get past that linear progression, there might be reason to add in additional exercises, accessory work. You might decide to do single arm or single leg.
Because she can press, she's pressing 65 pounds over her head. Right, but we had to work to that. Like that was like, again, the 10-pound bar. It was her arm which was shaking. We're like, we're not doing that. That's out of But it was more of like, let's see where you are. Let's get a baseline where you are.
Right.
So the single arm work she's doing, she's using like an 8-pound dumbbell, 5-pound dumbbell. That's again just for her to be able to push that arm a little bit more. Work that range of motion. I have a client who I have him, he's an older man. Same thing, he can't press overhead. He does the Viking press. I have him do a dowel stretch. Basically, the dowel's set up in the J cups, and he presses against the bar. He slides the dowel up the rack, and I tell him to push the left side and just allow that right side to come along for the ride. Well, when he does that, the right arm goes along for the ride. So it's, he can get a little bit. He's never going to be able to extend his arms fully, either, but it makes a difference when I say, push that left side, kind of keep moving that dowel up. The right side will come along. It just kind of comes right along for the ride. It might feel a little bit tighter. It's going to feel a little bit tighter, but it makes a difference. It gives him a little bit more range, and the brain starts to kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, it's not that bad. It's not so bad. Exactly. So, yeah, there is. I think the idea of working the general strength first, and that means building a good strong foundation with the bar, and then introducing maybe single arm work, rows, because we want to do that eventually. People should be able to do rows, single arm presses, but you and I both feel like that's on down the road. Because teaching somebody how to do a single arm dumbbell row is not that easy. Right? It's not that easy at all. Not that easy at all. They have to learn what their back is doing, but so it's easier to kind of teach them two arm movements in a sense, before you kind of introduce that single arm work, and then I feel like people pick it up a lot better, a lot faster, especially when they've already done some benching and they've learned how to keep their chest open and use their back. It's a little easier to introduce kind of a row. Like, think about your bench. Think about what we've done with when you're using your back and the bench, and then people can usually apply that to their rowing. But I think unilateral work everyone should do. But why are we doing it? Right? Why are we introducing that into someone's program? There needs to be a reason.
Yeah. And I think, just coming back initially to the topic that we were talking about with someone just starting with barbell training, depending on where they've been or what they've been doing before that, if they're concerned about something being asymmetrical, just take a deep breath. It's not that big of a deal.
Right.
Initially, we're just building general strength. It'll all be okay. But the thing you do want to be paying attention to is if the asymmetry is in some way causing pain. But that would be the same as any sort of issue with pain or an injury or something like that.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
If it's an asymmetry that produces pain, then you probably want to fiddle around and see if there's a modification that does not create that
Right.
sensation, as opposed to just saying like, oh, well, they said it was fine to be asymmetrical.
Right. Right.
But if it's not painful and you're just worried about like, oh, am I going to get my right arm? Is my right arm going to look bigger than my left arm? Or, what's it going to look like? Or, I just, something like that.
Exactly. And this isn't so much an asymmetry. Well, I guess I don't know if you would consider this an asymmetry problem, but I see a lot of younger women, thinner women, smaller women, I'd just say, not as who when they're training in the beginning, especially when they're squatting, they're pretty symmetrical. They're moving up and down, no issues, no hips, no movement from one side to the other. There's not a lot of shifting going on. Then the weight gets a little heavier and they start to shift to one side of their hip, right? And I usually see that happen again with my smaller, more underweight women, right? That they weight when it gets a little bit heavier, they can handle the weight. They're squatting, and the bar is even. It's not like they're tilting, but their hips just shift either to the left or to the right, right? And they come up, and there's never any pain. There's no pain. No one has ever said to me, "Oh yeah, I experience a lot of pain when I do that." That's just kind of their body doing. That's how they come out of the squat. Now, will that happen as they get stronger? Would that change if they maybe put weight on? If they put a little bit more body weight on, and if they kept lifting and training, would that shifting be less? I don't know, because usually I don't ever get a chance to see them put a lot of weight on. These are like these are like my dancers. These are, so, but I know I've asked them, do you feel anything when you do that? No, they don't even notice it. They don't even notice that they're shifting. They'll notice maybe their knees coming in, like knee cave, but in that their knees aren't coming in. They're just literally the hip clocks to the right or the left. There's like usually it's the right. I don't know, and there's never been a problem where they're talking about pain. So I kind of let it go, because again, the bar is even. They're going down and they're coming up and they're balanced. They just have this hip shift. The hips to one side.
If I'm working with someone who has something like that going on, and maybe it's because I work with more older clients who are often talking about like their sacrum, their low back, whatever. There's sort of like, I don't know, maybe visually as I'm watching them, a point at which I feel like it's like if there's a hip shift or a sway or something where I feel like, okay, that's enough, that's gone enough, and we'll reset. And chances are they're going to have something like that show up at their heavier weights, at their higher intensities. Say it shows up when they're working at RPE. I'm going to say RPE. If they're working at something that's like RPE 8.5 or above, maybe that form deviation starts to show back up again. And sort of bump up against that a little bit. And then I'll usually like reset someone. And then, at that same weight, maybe the next time around, they won't have that deviation, but it'll show up again when they get to the new RPE.
And what I usually see is I will see that over time, as they get stronger, it tends to the hips shift less as the weight, right? So they're getting stronger. So now the hips are shifting when they're nearing their top weight again, right? But that top weight is now 20, 30 pounds heavier than what it was before. Right. So they are stronger. But I never see this in my bigger women, right? I don't see this in my women who are not underweight, who, have more muscle, who, they're not, there's never hips, there's never shifting. It's usually, again, my smaller underweight women who I think it's just a more of like question of getting stronger. And if they've ever put weight on and things might change, because it just takes a little bit longer for them for that hip, that shifting to occur, simply because they're going to progress a little slower. They're going to put the weight on the bar a little slower because they are underweight, because they're going to be trying to gain weight perhaps, or not, but they will get stronger. It's just going to take some time, and that shifting is probably going to occur. But there's never pain. If there were pain, I would want them to stop. Like we would fix some things, but there's nothing to fix. It's like I can't tell them don't shift. They're going to shift. But again, the bar is moving straight. That's the knee cave is different. Knee cave, I can typically fix. That's just that's not necessarily an asymmetrical thing. That's just more women and their knee valgus, just the way that they're designed.
I guess the thing of it is the way you're talking about it, where the hip shift comes in when they're working at heavier weights and higher intensity. To me, the way I'm hearing that in terms of the way I understand RPE is that there is a way of discussing RPE, not just in terms of how many more reps do I have left in the tank, how heavy did that feel, but the degree of form deviation that occurs with the lift. And so if the form deviation is enough or has gone on for a period of time, then I'm going to take that as a cue to resetting.
Yeah, and I see that. I mean, definitely with one, I'm thinking of with one of my.
Even if it's not painful. It's like, okay, we've worked here.
Definitely. The program eventually, your program's going to change every how many weeks or so. So we get to a point where, okay, now the weight's really heavy. Okay, we need to back it off. We need to change your program. We need to break. Maybe we'll work up to a single instead of you doing.
Yeah, and like ideally, if the form is deviating or shifting, or you see something like that that's asymmetrical in terms of a form deviation, it's not gonna be over a protracted period of time so that it does produce pain. It gets reset, or the program gets shifted before that happens. I
think the biggest thing that I would probably want to take away from this discussion, if I were listening to it, is don't worry so much about your asymmetries, right? I mean,
We're talking to my former self right now.
don't worry so much about why is my right arm do
Now I
this
have
and
plenty
why
of
is
other things that I worry.
right. Why does my left arm do this? Why does my right foot turn out? I keep wanting to turn the right foot in, but then I experience some kind of discomfort. Don't fight with yourself. If you have a coach, let your coach see you. The coach is your mirror, right? The mirror is not your mirror. You should not be looking in the mirror while you're lifting anyway. But your coach is your mirror. If the coach sees something off, they might say, "Hey, I see this," and you need to give them the feedback of, "Well, when I put my leg in this position, or I do, this is what bothers me." And so the coach is like, "Okay, well, then just be mindful. If you're going to put your foot there, maybe turn the other foot out a little bit, or just I want you to try to think about keeping the weight on both legs as evenly as possible." I mean, there has to be a give and take with with your coach if you are getting coached. But if you're training on your own and you're feeling one side's feeling weird, well, videotape yourself. Kind of maybe tape yourself. Get an idea of like what's happening. Maybe pay attention more to what the right arm is doing versus the left arm. Right? I'll tell people that all the time when they're benching. Especially if I see there's kind of something off, pull with your right, push with your left. And just by telling someone to pull with their right, push with their left, the bar stays even, right? There's an external focus on what their shoulder is doing on the right side versus the left side. So having that attention, that mindfulness of my body's here, I'm keeping, I can feel my right side, I can feel my left side, I can feel my right foot, I can feel my left foot. That's part of training, that's part of lifting. Right? You're not just lying down on the bench and moving the bar up and down. You physically need to be there and be present. And if you find the bar is moving in one direction or the other, stop and kind of pay attention to, is it going more to the left? Is it going to the right? Videotape yourself from different angles to see what's going on. And, maybe play around with, what can you do to, pull the bar a little bit more to the right. Maybe pay attention more with that pushing down with that shoulder on the right side. And when you're driving the bar back up, make your left arm want to move a little faster. I always tell people all the time, it's not like your left arm's going to move and the right arm's not going to do anything. The right arm is definitely doing something. It will come along. It will come along. It's just you have to have a little bit more external focus on what's going on with your body as you're moving. But it shouldn't be a cause for drama and panic and I need to go see a PT because I'm off. This is this. It's if you're older, if you're an older lifter, you probably have had these experiences for your whole life. Like
aware of your asymmetry.
You can pick exactly. You can pinpoint. I mean, like I said, it wasn't until I actually got my orthotics, probably about 7 years ago, and I had the molds done. And the guy at Union Memorial, he looked at my molds. And he said, "Oh my God!" I was like, "What?" He said, "It's two different people." I mean, that was, and I looked at the molds, and sure enough, like my left foot versus my right foot, and Diego's going to be laughing when he listens to this because you're always talking about your feet. You're always talking about your feet. It was so startling. It was I just stared. I was like, oh my God, I never realized how different my feet were. And then I started thinking about
are they like a full size difference or something?
There's a whole size difference.
So do you buy shoes? You're the person who goes into the store and mixes up the shoes.
No, I'm not. I actually go with like what the left foot is. Like I go with well, it's weird. My left foot is wider than my right foot. Mm-hmm. My right foot is longer than my left foot. So I used to have to buy point shoes, and I used to have to buy 2 pairs of point shoes and swap the shoes.
So you are mixing and matching, but you would buy 2 sets. You don't like go in and mix them in the box together.
No. I literally had to spend money on 2 different pairs of point shoes, and I had a 3.5C and a 4B, a 4B for my right, and a 3.5C for my left. So you're talking like it's like having a bra where you're like a D and a C, like your one breast is like a D, a double D, but your left breast is a B.
Now you've gone off into some totally other territory, Emma.
But
you're starting out with this like footy fetish thing. Now you're on the front. I think you should stop talking. We should wrap this up.
Diego's, maybe I'll cut all this out.
Yeah, that's enough with your feet.
Anyway, Don't worry about being asymmetrical unless there is pain. And Rebecca and I are not doctors. We are not physicians, but we are coaches, and we've coached a lot of people in our time. If there is no pain, don't worry too much about it. Just, I think, observe, video, talk to your coach, and just understand
and
that.
this is where like keeping a really good training log is helpful too, because if it does turn out to be something that you do need to pay attention to, you should be keeping notes in
Exactly.
the training log.
Exactly.
All the time anyway.
Exactly.
In regards to
exactly.
these sorts of things.
But there's nothing wrong with doing single arm, single leg movement if it makes you feel good, and you have that in your program anyway, or your coach decides to program into you. There must be a reason for the reason. Everyone should be able to do single arm, single leg work as well as bilateral work. There, I said it.
And also, I will add, completely off topic, be able to move in different planes of motion.
Yes. And we can talk about that in another podcast.
That's a whole other thing.
But, just be good to your bodies and, enjoy your lifting, and don't stress too much about how you stand or how you move compared to somebody else, right? As long as you're moving pain-free and discomfort-free, you're in a good place.
Or even relatively pain-free.
You're in a good place. Thanks for listening. As always, if you've got questions or ideas or topics that you want us to discuss, you can always feel free to email both of us, either one of us, me at Emily@5by3.com and Rebecca at
cornerstonestrengthmaryland@gmail.com.
Thanks for spending some time with us today, and we will be back in a couple weeks.
Yeah, just before the county fair.
Ooh. We can talk about pigs.
Yeah, so yes, we can talk about pigs. We can talk about rate of gain. And also, I am going to have a goat I need to sell. So let me know if you're sick of mowing your grass.
If people want a goat, Rebecca has a goat for sale.
It will not make rate of gain.
We have very little grass. That goat would die if he tried it.
Oh my gosh, you could put a little diaper on the goat. It could be like an apartment goat.
Oh my God.
Diego would love that.
I don't think Diego would like a goat. I can't have a cat. There's no way I'm going to have a goat. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in a couple weeks with our next show. Bye, Rebecca. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening to 5x3 Radio with Emily and Rebecca. If you like our show and want to know more about 5x3 training, please visit us at www.5, that's F-I-V-E, the letter X, the number 3.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. To learn more about Rebecca, please visit her website, cornerstonestrengthmaryland.com. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.